Welcome to the second installment of part one of the lecture History of Religion in China. Here's where we left off. I was describing the geomantic component of I Ching divination, the use of a natural object to generate a hexagram. The performer, the diviner, would have with them generally a collection of stalks from a particular plant, a milfoil plant. So basically, it's a hardy grass. So they would have thick, dried stems of a plant, and they would cast them down or spread them, fan them out on a table or on the ground, and then interpret how they'd fallen, interpret how they lay on the ground in order to generate the hexagram. Their expertise was in both generating hexagrams and also interpreting hexagrams. Here's an example of a hexagram. It's thought that by the Zhou dynasty, which began about 700 BCE, that the Book of Changes had taken on a different form. And rather than simply having a collection of hexagrams arranged in the appropriate order, you would have a name of the hexagram in the vernacular language of the time, and also a judgment, an interpretation from an expert of the general reading of each hexagram. So, by the Zhou dynasty, as well as up until now, when you generate a hexagram, you'll have reference, you'll have an ability to access the historical record of previous interpretations of this hexagram by experts. There will be a collection of, they're called appended judgments, to help you interpret how this hexagram is relevant to your particular situation. Remember that the hexagram is a representation of the change that is currently happening. Understanding the change as it's happening now helps you to understand how the present is giving way to the future in this moment. So it's not an oracle for predicting the future, not straightforwardly. It's an oracle for knowing so deeply what's happening now that you understand how the present already is reaching into the future, how the present is pulling the future into the future present. So the diviner that would generate this hexagram would also assist in interpreting it. As you can see by this judgment, they don't offer a straightforward explanation of what one would do. So the diviner would be responsible for also generating, or tailoring, we could say, the judgment of the character to the particular situation. But at the same time, remember that this particular change that's been divined describes or is applicable to all of the events currently happening in the world. This is the change that the cosmos is undergoing at this moment, and it's relevant to each particular situation in subtly distinct ways. We have some insight into what the belief system was that was associated with the I Ching at the time. The first, and probably most important, is that the world is not chaotic or random. Things don't just happen. Everything that happens is dictated by a pattern, by an order, just as the seasons always go the same way. They always go from winter to spring to summer to fall and back to winter again. They never go in a different order. All things are subject to these sorts of patterns, using the seasons as sort of a model. The world, then, is always changing, always in process, but the process is predictable for those with a certain kind of knowledge. Also, there is no resolution, there's no finish, there's no end, importantly, even when things reach their most harmonious, their most beneficial, the best possible state of affairs, it's inevitable that those then will eventually degrade. That what may benefit all things will eventually turn back to darkness, to the the verdant nature of spring, when everything is abloom, when everything is thriving, will eventually enter winter, when everything passes back down, when everything dies, when everything returns. Change is the constant that you can count on. We also have the emergence in the I Ching of two likely familiar concepts. We have the dual corresponding pairs of yang and yin, where yang represents emergence, light, creative, male, right, virility, and building, where yin would be the converse of all of these, the dark, the receptive, the female, the declining. These forces are the two forces that give shape to the world, and our experience in everyday life are the subtle gradations, the gradual turning of one into the other and then back again. Insight into the changes gives one a sagely understanding of the world. One comes to understand the world not merely as it appears to us, but in terms of the changes that lead to the appearance of things to us, the underlying changes that gradually shift everything in the world from one event to the next through time. It's notable that I Ching divination shares some features in common with oracle bone divination, including the appeal to ancient peoples, appeal to history, appeal to the old. The hexagrams, remember, were made by ancient sages in order that we can understand the changes, that we can come to have a sagacious understanding of the world. The I Ching also provides a way to glean insight, right, to achieve some sort of understanding of the way things are changing. I Ching divination has one very particular thing that's different from oracle bone divination, namely, there is no appeal directly to ancestors or gods. There's just the hope to understand the changes that affect the events. There's no anthropological feature of the changes themselves. There's no way to appeal to them. The changes dictate everything that's happening in the world. And in a sense, there's a way in which you can say that they can't be changed themselves. I don't know if that makes sense. There's there's almost what we would call a deterministic aspect to it. One should be prepared for change. One shouldn't seek to change what will happen in the future. The best way is to know what will happen and be appropriately prepared. The changes that one can make oneself, the way that one can alter the world, are subtle. And it's not about making big changes to what will happen. It's about if you can be prepared enough to, if you know that a drought is likely coming, then you should start stockpiling. And then when the drought comes, you won't be as heavily affected as you would be if you didn't see it coming. So humans can change subtle aspects, but only in preparation for the changes as they're coming. So this aspect is quite different than oracle bone divination. Next, we'll talk about Taoism. According to Taoists, our attempts to understand and categorize the world, to call things one thing and not another, um, to what we would call social constructs or distributions of power, are actually leading us away from our true and authentic selves. They believe that there is one way that the world is, an undifferentiated and inexpressible truth that we might call Tao. It can't be described in words because it's constantly changing. It's everything taking shape. It's everything building up but then fading away. Our attempt to capture this in a concept, in a word, will always be misguided because we won't be able to, in a way of speaking, get around the other side to completely encompass and look at everything that's happening so that we can understand it. Tao is always extending out into the future. Tao extends back in the past. The best we can do, according to Taoists, is to merge with it, right? To become one with it, to seek to understand it in a way that the understanding of it becomes the understanding of ourselves. The goal, then, as I've written it here, might be called the return to the pre imperial primordium, which would basically mean that before we humans started organizing ourselves into societies, into kingdoms, we were one with all of the diverse and combined entities of the world. We were part of what was then one thing, a primordium. We could think of it as like just a big, almost like a pot of soup, right? We were all part of this undifferentiated mass. But just as soup can be good or bad, soup can be tasty or not tasty, the best kinds of soup are soups in which the flavors enhance one another, where they go together, where the spiciness and the sour create a new kind of flavor, create a kind of flavor that is delicious. In the same sort of way, undifferentiated Tao, everything merged within it, synergistically, that is, everything doesn't just exist. Everything helps one another to exist. Each type of thing, the thing that it naturally does, the thing that each thing naturally does, fits in with the things that other things naturally do to create this vastly beneficial whole. This could be called Tao, here the pre-imperial primordium. The Tao Te Ching is the most famous book associated with Taoism. In fact, it existed before what we now call Taoism existed. It's the progenitor, we could say, the first text of Taoism. The title of the book is Tao Te Ching. Its author, this stone man, Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu. You can tell because it said that Lao Tzu, who was able to merge with Tao, to commune totally with Tao, could hear everything in the cosmos. So he would need large ears. He was known for having large ears. The Tao Te Ching, you can see the Chinese characters here. Jing, of course, is the same as I Ching, which would mean classic or book. So literally, it would be translated as the classic of Tao, which we've been describing, which itself could be literally translated as the way or path. And De would be that second character. And it means something like the individual expression of Tao. It's been translated as virtue or vitality, the individual expression of Tao in each little thing. The first passage of the Tao Te Ching is a very famous passage, and it reads, "The way, or Tao, that can be put into words is not really Tao. The naming that can assign fixed reference to things is not really naming." So automatically, we have this very destabilizing feature of Taoism and Taoist religion, which is that you can't ever talk about Tao the way that it truly is. You can't really talk about anything the way that it truly is because words themselves have this misleading character. Once you name something, it's like you've grasped it. If you grasp something, then it doesn't move, it doesn't change. You're attempting to hold something in place that itself is constantly changing. This is a common feature of Taoist philosophy and religion. In order to let things be, you have to resist the urge to know it, to grasp it, to hold on to it. We will continue this conversation in the next part.